It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS AM 1160 and 101.1 FM. And Bryan Reesman is on the line with us here this morning. Rock Stars at Home, as they say, a magical mystery tour. The first ever guide to the most ostentatious, over-the-top, and off-the-wall homes in rock and roll history. And you've been doing this, Bryan, for decades to come up with some of the best stuff writing on rock music and music as a whole. And this just must have been candy to you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So tell me about this. Where did the idea come from, and how much fun was it for you to pull all of this stuff together?
Well, I'm one of this. There's 6 authors, and it's basically a British book. So I'm the American guide, and I'm doing all the American press for them. And they had approached me about doing it. It's a company called Elephant Book Company in the UK, and they create these books, and they license them out. And so the Apollo publishers in America have Apollo's taken over the book here and distributing it. And so they wanted me to cover. They wanted to cover everything, and they wanted me to cover. And the 4 chapters I worked on, I was on Cribs, on Ozzy Osbourne, on sort of the heavy metal horror collectors like Kirk Hammett and Rob Zombie, and Corey Taylor from Slipknot, and then something on GNR and Motley Crue. And what's interesting is, while this does have actually all these ostentatious homes, not all of them are. I mean, when I covered the early days of Crew and GNR, they definitely were living not under the best circumstances.
Yeah.
The kind of party apartments they have, and they talk about there's a section on punk bands, the kind of the squalor that they lived in. When I did the Cribs chapter, actually, it's funny. Redman, the rapper, unlike a lot of the other rappers who rented fancy cars to make it look like they had even more money, he actually lived in this dilapidated Staten Island house with not a functioning doorbell, and there's no garage, and they had cash in the house. and then they do other off-the-wall things, like the apartment Jimi Hendrix lived in for a year in London, which is next door to where the composer Handel had lived at one point. So he has all these classical people coming over. He started listening to that guy's music. He's like, who is this guy? Like, why do people keep coming over asking about him? And, David Bowie, there's a section for 2 years. He lived in Berlin when he was working on the Berlin trilogy, and he lived with Iggy Pop. So what I like about it is that, yes, it talks about a lot of the big houses, like, George Harrison, for example, George and Olivia, a huge mansion that they had out in the country, and yet then you have these smaller, more intimate ones as well, where interesting things also happens.
I love the one, and they marketed, because it's so hot right now, they marketed the Freddie Mercury house. But I thought it was really interesting when you read about Freddie's place, because it's more a humble type of abode, isn't it? It's a warm, cozy place for him.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that actually, when you live in a city like London, you're not going to. It's like New York. You can't. Having a huge house is going to cost you a lot of money, even if you're rich. So you just have to. It's more of a question of some place that you're comfortable. A lot of these homes for people are sanctuaries. They're sanctuaries away from the craziness of the rock and roll lifestyle.
Yeah. So we all have these images of these guys and gals and what their lives are like. And you get the chance to tell us, well, is it really what we're thinking? So take me inside Ozzy's house. Because we would have the wildest images in our minds of what Ozzy's place is like. You were there.
Well, actually, yeah, the show they had it on the show. I mean, on the Osbournes. The thing about the Osbournes house is that, even though it has a lot of the gothic trappings, sort of the horror stuff, it was very well organized and sort of tastefully done, which makes me think that Sharon and/or interior decorators were brought in to do this, because you can imagine Ozzy doing it. It would probably be slightly different. I mean, it's still in that house is still in Beverly Hills, and you still have a certain image. And I think even if you are kind of like have this image of a crazy rock star, which he really at this point in his life is not anymore. I mean, you still want to have some place that makes you feel at ease, even if you want to give off the vampire vibe or whatever it is that you're doing. I mean, I like the fact that even though it's not in the book, the singer from Him, the Finnish band, for a while lived in like a castle tower in the Helsinki area. But I'm sure it wasn't just in disarray. Now, I don't know if you saw the Rolling Stones exhibit that had gone through. It's gone through States a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Like when the Stones, their early apartment looked like a giant ashtray. I mean, it was just a mess. It was the classic artist scenario, like, yeah, whatever, it's here somewhere, and it's all about the art. But that's different. The early days are different than when you were established. So I don't think Ozzy and Sharon want to live like, he was living in the early days. If you read his book, I mean, his first marriage was just crazy. That poor woman, I don't know how she survived dealing with him.
One of the things that, you look at the book and you see the pictures and everything, and you say to yourself, I'm just glad it's not Scratch and Sniff, because that could not have been good. Bryan Reesman with us this morning, Rock Stars at Home. So Chris Charlesworth, Eddie Fiegel, Colin Salter, Simon Spence, Daryl Easley. I probably butchered a name or two there. Did you guys ever get together in one place, or was it all just, here's my segment, here's yours?
Yeah, that was pretty much the way it was. I kind of just ended up, emailing stuff in. As far as because some of those guys may have met over in England, but since I was here and I had like 4 or 6 weeks to put my stuff together, it kind of went in. It's funny how that works. These days with technology, things are so different. I realized that, and people can Skype and do all sorts of things now. Although, funnily enough, when I'm doing interviews these days, it's still pretty much, when they do a phoner, it's a phoner. You don't tend to do video Skype very much, which I think I would like to do more often. Because, in-person stuff does, as you know, makes a difference.
Oh, yeah.
When you have somebody come into the studio rather than calling in, it's a different vibe altogether.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's kind of changed a lot. I mean, it's great obviously I'm talking to you on the phone, so it's nice to connect even if I can't come in. But it is cool to have that interaction, because funnier things often happen in person.
Yeah, that's true. And you find out that probably guys and they have an idea when you're coming, when Bryan Reesman's coming to the house. Okay, this is what we want him to see, and then all of a sudden they get a little more comfortable, and then you get a little peek behind the veil, if you will. You've been doing this long enough. I mean, for all of these decades, writing
25 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything surprise you when you did this project? I can't imagine you're easy to surprise.
Well, for me, the stuff that I wrote about, I think the crib stuff was interesting, because I knew some of it was probably BS. MTV has a history, it was funny to learn that Pimp My Ride, a lot of those cars that they souped up either fell apart or stopped working a few weeks after those episodes had been aired. Because you're not really supposed to do that with those cars. It looks great on camera. And I think Cribs, it was funny for me to find out, like, Robbie Williams, the first time he was on the show, he was actually renting Jane Seymour's house and just acted like it was his place. But when you watch the footage, he's clearly, as the British would say, taking the piss. Like, he's like, yes, and here's a dining room where I'll be spending Christmas alone because I have no friends. And it's like, of course you don't, right? And so I liked that. I mean, luckily, Kirk Hammett's exhibit I grew up outside of Boston, so his exhibit was up in Salem, Mass, and I got to check that out. So when I had done the chapter on the heavy metal horror collectors, I saw a significant part of his collection. It was right there.
Yeah.
I mean, he lent it out to them, which was great. And I actually lived, what's funny is when I did the GNR Motley Crue section, I lived in Hollywood the summer of 1990. I also lived in LA 91 to 93. But the summer of 1990, I was at North Fuller and Hollywood Boulevard, and it was 2 blocks north of the Rock and Roll Ralph's, which was a supermarket that had senior citizens by day and rockers by night. I lived in the complex. Yeah, you heard sex through the walls. You heard people cranking loud music. You didn't want to go in the jacuzzi. There were long-haired people everywhere. It was also the summer of the Judas Priest Subliminal Messages trial, which is funny how many of them didn't even know what was going on at the time. But everywhere you went in L.A., man, there was kind of a little bit of that, Wayne's World thing going on. If you cruise the Sunset Strip, to go like a mile, it would take you 45 minutes. These people would just cruise to go see all the rocker dudes in leather, the big hair, and their girlfriends in like the hiked up skirts and stilettos. I mean, it was like like going to the zoo or something. It was just ridiculous. And so, that was just a mild version of it. So when I read about what Crew and GNR were up to, it doesn't surprise me that that level of debauchery existed.
Yeah.
It's something that we don't really contemplate anymore. And I think a lot of rock and roll has gotten sanitized now. And, for better or for worse, there's certain things that shouldn't come back, like the treatment of women in a certain way. But rock and roll doesn't have the same edge now. I mean, the youngest person in the book is one of the Gallagher brothers from Oasis. I mean, there aren't really any really young rock stars here either.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one. Yeah, it's one thing that as I was looking through, I thought. In fact, when I saw was it Noam Gallagher? Was that the one, or Liam?
I don't have the book in front of me.
Yeah, but at any rate, when I saw him, I thought, gosh, he's the youngest guy here. These are all older guys. In fact, it starts with Sinatra.
Yes, who actually, even though he didn't really like rock and roll, I don't think he was sort of like the original rock star in a way. because he, because certain connections that he had, and also I'm sure he had a good time. I mean, the Rat Pack guys, I'm sure they had lots of women and all the craziness that goes along with it. I don't think that just because someone isn't a rocker doesn't mean they don't party. I mean, I once, I was friends with an equestrian at one point, and she pointed out that people who are, ride horses in competition, they work really hard, but when they party, man, they party.
Yeah.
I've known people in the classical world who, when they party, they have to go and have a good time. It's not just restricted to that, but rockers are given more license to be that way because it kind of comes with the territory and it comes with the image. But it's been sanitized a lot more, and obviously you don't want things to go crazy, like with the whole R. Kelly thing. That's where we're seeing, what can you do to shock people anymore, and what are people going to accept?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's a packaged rebellion.
They're always on stage, and they're never on stage at the same time. Rock Stars at Home is the name of the book, and we've been able to spend some time with Bryan Reesman today. It's just fun talking to you, and the book is a great read too. Appreciate your time this morning.
Well, thank you, sir.
Have a great weekend.
Well, you too.